Chapter 11. Riley decided to approach the Pearson house casually from the beach. Having made that decision, she returned to her own house after the lunch with Ash, exchanged her shoulder bag for a fanny pack just large enough to hold her weapon, ID, a couple of power bars, and house keys, found a pair of sunglasses behind which she could at least partially hide a multitude of uncertainties, and went out for a seemingly casual stroll. Casual out on the beach meant carrying her gun out of sight, or at least that was what she told herself. Judgment call. Sometimes I wear the weapon on my hip and sometimes I hide it away. That makes sense, right? Her wavering was both uncharacteristic and unprofessional and scary. Riley pushed it away, telling herself one more time that things would become clearer eventually. Other people were hitting the beach as well, since it was after 2 and therefore considered a safer time of day for the sun worshippers. A number of people nodded and smiled as Riley passed, but nobody called out to her, which was a relief since the faces were those of strangers. She was, in any case, more intent on scanning the oceanfront houses as she passed. No one had been specific as to the actual location of the Pearson house, other than to say it was up the beach from your place. Jake had been so pissed at her when she left the arson scene with Ash that she hadn't wanted to ask him. As for Ash, she'd been preoccupied wondering when he was going to repeat his request that she confided in him about everything and had forgotten to ask him. Oh yeah, some cop I am. Rather than repeat that request, he had instead talked casually of casual things, and Riley had reached the uncomfortable conclusion that he was simply going to wait until she brought up the subject. Either he knew her well enough to know that she despised both ultimatums and feeling cornered, or else he was utterly confident that she would, sooner or later, confide in him. She found either possibility disconcerting. Hey, Riley! She stopped, but remained where she was on the beach, just above the high water mark. A man, waving an arm to get her attention, was walking rapidly toward her across the wooden walkway that provided beach access from one of the houses. The Pearson house. Riley didn't know. Had she visited the house at all? She didn't remember. The house at which she was looking was no more familiar to her than any other one in the neat row of attractively individualized yet basically similar houses along the beach. Lots of deck space, lots of windows, colorful beach towels fluttering in the breeze as they hung over deck railings to dry. Nothing made this particular house memorable, but the man. I know you, your face is in my mind. One of the faces in her mind, at least. Not a bad face, on the thin side with the bones a bit too prominent. It matched his thin body, which was currently dressed in an old t-shirt featuring the logo of a 70s rock band and a pair of slightly baggy, too long shorts. At least he's not wearing a Speedo. Riley did her best to shake off the irrelevant thought and concentrate on the man trudging awkwardly toward her through the deep sand piled up at the bottom of the walkway stairs. Riley in mid-40s at a guess, fairly tall, thatch of dark hair in no particular style and very pale skin, already showing the first pink signs of sunburn. Already? Do I know he's only been here a short while, or just assume it from what Ash said? Sunblock, she said casually as he reached her. You can get burned before you know it on the beach. It's that nice breeze coming off the water. She was still groping in her mind, but so far had found no name for this vaguely familiar face. He grimaced. Yeah, that's what Jenny keeps telling me. She also says the punchlines are too easy when you're a sunburned Satanist. That is a point, Riley said. Satanist? Oh, shit. But if he's so open about it. Anyway, I'm wearing sunblock today. Plenty of punchlines for that now that I think about it, but never mind. Riley, what's this we're hearing about the body found yesterday? He was a sacrifice? You must know I'm not free to discuss any of the details with civilians. It's an ongoing investigation. Your name, damn it, what's your name? It's Steve. So ordinary. Damn, but I've got it wrong. But apparently not. Riley, if he was killed and hung above the altar inside a circle of salt, we both know that's ritual. She pulled her sunglasses down her nose and peered at him over the tops. Not my ritual, he added hastily, or ours. Rather, come on, Riley, you know we don't do that kind of shit. I don't know anybody who does. And a human victim is sure as hell not what we expected when we were invited out here. Invited? Yeah, about that, she said, testing the waters cautiously. About that invitation. What about it? Steve frowned. I told you when we talked about it Saturday afternoon. A lot's happened since then. She kept it vague. Steve didn't appear to find that strange. No kidding. I guess the sheriff has you on the murder officially, huh? Riley pushed her sunglasses back up her nose so she could hide behind them. Like I said, Steve, it's an ongoing investigation. Right. Well, just so you know, I'd a lot rather talk to you than the sheriff. He thinks we're a bunch of nuts. Probably dangerous nuts at that. You know better. Do I? Mildly, she said, well, you can't really blame the sheriff. You've been talking to people about your beliefs. We have nothing to hide, Steve insisted. Having nothing to hide is one thing. Going around telling people you practice Satanism when weird things have been happening in the area is asking for trouble. Yeah, so you said when we talked on Saturday. Riley waited, hoping that silence on her part would keep him talking. It was a technique that had worked for her often in the past, and it worked now. I know you warned me, Riley, but Jesus, I didn't know some poor bastard was gonna get killed. If I'd had any idea that was in the wind, I never would have brought my people here. We concentrate on compassion rituals, I told you that. We don't do any destruction rituals. The energy required and expended is just too negative. We don't want that coming back to us. Even if you had an enemy you'd prefer to get out of your way? Even if. And we don't make those kinds of enemies. I told you we're harmless. Okay. So who invited you out here? Steve frowned at her. I told you that too. He said his name was Wesley Tate. Desperately trying to read his expression and pick up on verbal clues, Riley said, I'm still having a hard time believing you'd bring your people here on the word of a stranger, Steve. I would have thought you'd know better than that. You've been practicing, 20 years? Nearly that, he sighed. Yeah, I know it could have been a setup of some kind. At best, somebody trying to take our money, and at worst, a hate group out to make an example of us. But he just sounded so damn charming and welcoming. Riley, we've been taking heat back home, getting pressure to go elsewhere, so the invitation to visit Opal Island came at a perfect time. A suspiciously perfect time. Riley mentally crossed her fingers and gasped, but to accept the invitation of a man you hadn't even set eyes on. I know. Not something I normally have considered, except that he knew all the right things to say. I mean, we're not some secret brotherhood with code words and bullshit like that, but you know as well as I do that there are code words, she supplied dryly. Well, yeah, the right words anyway, the right names. He knew people he checked out, and it wasn't like he was inviting us to his place or asking for anything, just suggesting we might want to check out Opal Island and Castle, because people were laid back here, and because there were some even like-minded. And have you found them? No, but it's just been a few days after all. We've sort of put out the word, he grimaced, as you said, rotten timing, obviously. And I've got to tell you, if those like-minded people are into human sacrifice, we're not going to have much in common with them. If anything at all, a new voice added pleasantly. Riley looked past Steve, unsettled yet again that she hadn't noticed the approach of the tall, dark woman now joining them on the beach, especially since the woman was strikingly beautiful and had a strong, definite presence. Probably in her mid-30s, she was both exotic and sensual, her centerfold body ripe to bursting and her dark eyes practically smoldering. "Hey, Riley," she said as she joined them. Her voice was as sultry as the rest of her, low and rather throaty, and her night-black hair fell straight and gleaming down her back all the way to her hips. Put her photo in the dictionary beside the name of the alternative religion of your choice, and she looked the part. Even wearing a very brief swimsuit, maybe especially wearing a very brief swimsuit. Riley dredged in her mind and produced a name. "Hey, Jenny." "Guess the shit's really hit the fan with this murder," Jenny said, shaking her head. "Is that what you came to tell Steve, that we should pack up and get out?" Though the other woman's voice was casual, the question was, in some peculiar way Riley couldn't define, some sort of challenge. She was sure of that, even if she didn't understand what lay behind it. At least, I think I'm sure. "I was just stretching my legs after lunch," she said mildly. "Steve was the one who wanted to talk to me." "Should we pack up and leave?" Jenny asked. "Not my place to say, but there's been a murder, and plenty of evidence left behind to point toward the occult. So if I were you, I'd be careful, maybe stick close to the house. Maybe keep my beliefs to myself for the duration. If you were us." Riley nodded. "Something like this happens, and people get jumpy as hell. Things snowball, so I'd lay low for a while, if I were you." "Understood." Jenny smiled. She linked her arm with Steve's, and with her free hand reached out to pat Riley on the shoulder. "You don't worry about us. We'll be fine." The candlelight cast dancing shadows around the room and shimmered off the velvet hangings and silken ropes. On the wall above the altar hung an inverted cross, fashioned of some metallic material that also caught the light. Below the inverted cross was the usual platform, and upon it the altar. She was naked. Her head raised on a pillow, she lay in the center of the rectangular platform, so that one of its long edges came to the backs of her widely parted knees. Her arms were stretched out to either side, and each hand grasped a silver candlestick containing a black candle. The candles were lit. Her body was pale, her long black hair arranged to frame her bold nakedness, with no attempt to coyly conceal. Her lush breasts were tipped with artificially blood-red nipples, And as Riley watched, the robed celebrant, the priest conducting the ceremony, stepped between the altar's spread legs and dipped his thumb into the silver cup he held, then drew with the viscous liquid an inverted cross onto the pale flesh of her lower stomach. Red blood. The room smelled of incense and blood, and Riley had to breathe through her mouth to avoid coughing. Couldn't cough, couldn't give herself away. She peered through the narrow opening in the draperies, trying to look for anything familiar in the robed individuals. Height, build, a gesture, anything to help her identify at least one of them. But it was an exercise in futility. They were eerily featureless, their faces concealed by the hoods. They were chanting in low voices, in Latin, and she could only catch a few words of what they were saying. Magni de nostri satanas. Riley sat up with a smothered gasp, her heart pounding. A black mass. That was what she'd seen. Part of a version of the satanic ceremony known as a black mass. Seen? Seen when? Seen where? She was in bed, Riley realized, in her own bed, in her own bedroom of the beach house with moonlight streaming through the blinds and the windows. When she turned her head cautiously, it was to see Ash sleeping beside her. Beyond him, she saw the clock on the nightstand. 5:30 a.m. Wednesday? No, that wasn't right. That couldn't be right. She'd been on the beach talking to Steve and Jenny, and it had been no later than 3 or so on Tuesday afternoon, and then here, now, waking in bed with Ash, more than 12 hours later. Resisting panic, she slipped from the bed without waking him. She found one of her sleep shirts on the floor and put it on, then crept from the bedroom. As usual, several lights had been left on dimly in the main living area of the house, and the blinds in there were firmly closed against the night. The latter fact told her only that she must have, as usual, closed all the blinds at dusk. Riley disliked the exposed sensation of uncovered windows at night, especially when people were likely to walk along the beach on the other side of those windows. A holdover from her army days, when being too visible and presenting too much of a target had never been a good idea. Riley paused for a moment and held out her hands, studying them. Not too shaky, but hardly steady, rather the way she felt inside. She went to the kitchen to collect an energy bar and a glass of orange juice. The TV remote was on the breakfast bar, so she used it to turn the set on, hitting the mute button as she did so. Automatically turning it to CNN, hopeful of verifying the date, she swore softly to see a commercial for some diet product. Figured. She got her juice and the power bar, then carried both to the small table in one corner of the living area, where it looked like she'd been working on her laptop. Looks like? Jesus, why don't I remember this? It would have been easy to panic, very easy. She sat down and tapped a key to take the computer out of sleep mode. When the dark screen brightened, the first thing she did was check the time and date, just to confirm that this was indeed very early on Wednesday. And it was. She'd lost more than 12 hours. But there was lost, and then there was lost. From the looks of things, she'd been functional, even working. In one window was an FBI report on the recent occult activities in the U.S., while another window contained the beginning of a report apparently written by her. She murmured, since when do I write? Oh. The first line explained the otherwise inexplicable. Since I have no idea what the long-term effects of my current situation might be, I've decided to keep this written journal/report for the remainder of the investigation. Current situation? That was worded so ambiguously she must have feared someone else might read it. Maybe Ash, for instance, since he apparently spent most nights here. In any case, the rest of the entry was pretty bare bones, detailing only the previous morning's visit to the sheriff's department, the autopsy results on their murder victim, and her visits with the sheriff to the arson sites. Not a word about her stroll up the beach and meeting/conversation with Steve and Jenny. Then again, maybe she'd imagined all that, or dreamed it. Like the Black Mass, where Jenny had served as the altar. Maybe Riley had dreamed that? It had certainly seemed unreal, at least in a sense. Blood. Blood played no part in a Black Mass, despite popular belief. It was supposed to be a ceremony all about mocking traditional Christian beliefs and ceremonies, twisting and corrupting them. Blasphemous, certainly from any conventional point of view, but neither dangerous nor inherently evil, and it didn't involve blood or actual sacrifice. At least it wasn't supposed to. Riley looked around the quiet, peaceful space, listened to the surf pounding out on the beach, and wondered what was real, what she could trust, what she could believe in. Had she actually witnessed that ceremony? Had she dreamed it? A touch on the nape of her neck found the burns left by a taser. That was real. The man sleeping in her bed was certainly real, though the presence of both in her life was baffling. She didn't sleep with men she barely knew, most especially during an ongoing investigation, and her training and experience made it highly unlikely that anyone could sneak up and blindside her with a taser attack, particularly in a situation where all her instincts and senses would have been on alert. Unless whoever had attacked her had been with her all along. That was possible, she supposed. Maybe more than possible. Someone she had trusted could have been close enough to surprise her, to catch her off guard. Nice little theory, that. The problem was proving it, identifying who that someone might be, and accomplishing both objectives without giving away her own ignorance on the subject. No one so far had volunteered any information about where she had been or who she might have been with on Sunday night. At least not that she remembered, damn it. All I really know is that I was tasered, that I was covered in some of the same blood found in our victim's stomach. Dan, was he identified in the last 12 hours? That was the priority, to ID him. Though surely I would have made a note in this damn report of mine. And what about that other probable victim? Has he or she even been discovered yet? She didn't know, couldn't remember. All she knew was that another 12 hours of her life were gone. And she didn't have the faintest idea what she had been doing all that time. She put her head in her hands and slowly rubbed her face. Riley. She looked up to see Ash approaching her and hoped her face didn't show the growing panic she was all too aware of feeling. It's not even dawn, she told him, outwardly calm. I didn't wake you, did I? I'm getting used to these pre-dawn urges of yours to work. He bent down to kiss her briefly, adding, they seem to come most often after a restless night. You tossed and turned a bit. Sorry. Didn't disturb me much, anyway, he smiled. I gather you're up for the day? I'll grab a shower and shave, then fix breakfast. Somewhat involuntarily, she said, you're almost too good to be true. Know that, pal? I keep trying to tell you, if you're not careful, somebody else is going to steal me away from you. He kissed her again, then headed off for his shower. Riley sat there at the table, her computer humming quietly, and gazed after him. Right now, in this moment, she felt safe with Ash, but what did that mean? That she trusted him? That she felt no threat from him? Or simply that she was thinking and feeling with a part of her anatomy quite a bit south of her brain? Could she even trust her feelings, any of them, when her senses and memory were, to say the least, unreliable? When she could lose more than 12 hours without warning and apparently without some external cause? There's a reason, a trigger, there has to be. I just have to figure it out. Easily said, not so easily done. Chapter 12. Riley finished the power bar and juice, hoping the calories would help clear the fog in her brain, but not very surprised when it didn't happen. She couldn't seem to think except to ask herself questions for which there were no answers. Yet, at least. I've been functioning. Normally, or surely Ash would have commented, but I don't remember what I've said or done. And lost hours and a restless night culminating in a dream or memory of some kind of black mass can't possibly mean anything good. The panic was crawling inside her now, cold and sharp, and no longer something she could deny to herself. This was out of control. She was out of control, and she had no business whatsoever being part of a murder investigation. The right thing to do, the safe and sane thing to do, would be to return to Quantico. Today. Now. Something on the TV broke through the panic to catch her attention just then, and she lunged for the remote to turn on the sound. Bishop. He hardly ever made the news, went out of his way to avoid being photographed or videoed, and always kept a low profile during investigations. So what the hell was he involved in that was making the national news? The agent in charge refuses to comment on the ongoing investigation, but sources within the Boston police confirmed only minutes ago that the latest victim of the serial killer terrorizing the city these last weeks was indeed 21-year-old Annie Lamott, daughter of Senator Abe Lamott. The senator and his wife are in seclusion with family as police and FBI agents continue to work around the clock to catch their daughter's killer. The CNN anchor went on to the next subject, her voice turning perky as she reported on something less tragic. Riley hit the mute button on the remote and returned to her laptop. It didn't require either memory of recent events or senses to tell her what to do next. Within 2 minutes, she was reading a more detailed FBI report of the Boston serial killer, and the report explained a lot. Bishop was hip deep in his own investigation, alright? In fact, he was tracking a particularly vicious killer with, so far, at least a dozen notches on his belt. 12 known victims in just under 21 days, all young women, all murdered with bloody abandon. No wonder Boston was going nuts. No wonder this particular series of murders was making national news. And no wonder Bishop had accepted Riley's assurances that she could handle the situation here, even when she had failed to report in. She doubted he'd had much time to sleep or eat in the past few weeks, let alone worry too much about any of his primaries, people he had handpicked as team leaders because they were highly intelligent, capable agents with all the skills and initiative required to operate independently of both him and the FBI if necessary, and for as long as necessary. It just usually wasn't necessary. With that thought in mind, Riley remained online and connected to a special database at Quantico reserved for the SCU. Wended? WENDED. I don't know that word. Her way through the layers of security and checked on the whereabouts of the rest of the unit. Jesus. Chicago, Kansas City, Denver, Phoenix, LA, and Seattle. Plus 2 small towns she'd never heard of in the Gulf Coast region. The unit was literally scattered across the map, manpower and resources spread thinner than she'd ever known them to be, and every team was involved in high-risk operations, ranging from murder to possible terrorist threats, the latter being investigations the unit had only recently begun to be called into as consultants. As far as Riley could tell, she was the only agent operating without a team, partner, or any kind of backup. But then she was also the only one who had set off on a very unofficial investigation of a few oddities, not murder or any other major crime then. Now the situation was definitely high risk, and being on her own here now was both a very bad idea and seemingly unavoidable, unless she bailed, returned to Quantico. Nobody would blame her for that, not under the circumstances. Hell, if she told Bishop about this latest wrinkle, he'd undoubtedly recall her without even allowing her time to pack. Riley realized she was fingering the burn at the base of her skull. She forced herself to stop, swore under her breath, and disconnected from the SCU's database. She couldn't bail, couldn't leave. She had to figure out what was going on. "Let's pretend," she whispered. She could do that. It was what she did best, after all. Pretend. Pretend everything was normal. Pretend there was nothing wrong with her. Pretend she wasn't terrified. The sheriff said to Ash, "You realize, of course, that you have no business being involved in this investigation. This part of it, at least. Your part begins when we catch the son of a bitch." Ash leaned back in his chair at the conference table and shrugged. "I've gotten involved in the past, long before the trial stage. We both know that. Not in a murder, Ash. We haven't had a murder until now, not since I've been DA, and not since you've been sheriff. I'm betting if we'd had one, we'd have worked together. I may not be a cop, but I have experience in investigations, murder investigations included, and you're too good a cop to ignore that." Leah glanced at Riley, interested to know how the other woman was reacting to all this, and wasn't very surprised to see that Riley was apparently engrossed in reading reports concerning what little information had come in since the previous afternoon. There wasn't much. Teams had been canvassing Opal Island as well as Castle, literally going door to door in search of an identity for their murder victim. So far, the search had turned up 3 temporarily misplaced teenagers and 1 temporarily misplaced husband. Parentheses, the former all found sleeping off a late party, and the latter discovered on a nearby golf course. But no man missing since sometime Sunday night. Leia had read and reread the reports Riley was now studying, and wondered what the federal cop found so interesting. Then again, she decided maybe it wasn't interest as much as a refusal to get involved in the discussion going on between the two men. I'll take any resource I can get, the sheriff was saying. But don't you have to be in court? Ash shook his head. Not at all this week, and hardly next week. Unless something unexpected happens, at least. Even my paperwork is all caught up. Just bored and have time on your hands, huh? Jake, it's your investigation. Want me to keep my nose out of it? Just say the word. It wasn't really a challenge, Leah thought. And yet it was. Leah. If Jake refused Ash's offer of help, it wouldn't be a smart move. Ash had worked as an assistant DA in Atlanta for several years, and whatever rumor had to say about why he left, nobody doubted he had gained considerable experience with murder investigations while he was there. More than Jake had when it came right down to it. Refusing the offer of that sort of experienced help might well be something the voters would remember come the next election, particularly if the situation worsened. Plus, it made Jake appear either insecure or jealous of his authority, or just plain jealous, period. So Leah wasn't very surprised to see her boss accept the offered help, albeit with little grace or gratitude. As long as we're clear about who's in charge, I got no problem with helping out. I got no problem with you helping out, Ash. We're clear. Okay, then. Jake looked at Riley. See anything the rest of us missed? I doubt you missed it, she said calmly. The blood in the Vic's stomach contained glycerol. An anticoagulant, yeah, I got that. And an ingredient in all kinds of things, from antifreeze to cosmetics. So not exactly difficult for someone to get their hands on. Which means virtually impossible to trace. Leah asked, so what does that mean? That there was glycerol in the blood? She hated to admit to ignorance, especially when the sheriff had, rather surprisingly to her, chosen her to assist him on this case. But she didn't feel less of a cop for not having specialized knowledge, and she needed to understand. It was Jake who said somebody didn't want the blood to clot too quickly. I'm still in the dark, Leah complained. Riley said what it probably means is that the blood the victim drank, whether willingly or because he was forced to, wasn't fresh. Someone had kept it for that purpose. Maybe for quite a while. Leah grimaced. Bucket of blood. Oh, yuck. Was it so much? Ash asked. At least at court, Riley answered. That's way more than is used in any ritual I know of. Ash said, and more than anybody could have swallowed without vomiting some of it back up, I would have thought. Riley looked at the ME's report again. Some minor abrasions inside the esophagus. I'm betting they used a tube. Probably while he was unconscious. Poured the stuff straight into his stomach. And I doubt he lived long enough after that to get rid of it. Then what was the point? Jake demanded. Fill his stomach with blood and then decapitate him? Why? I don't know, Riley said, but there had to be a reason. Blood in a ritual represents life, power. Human blood much more so than animal blood. Leah's thoughts were running along a different track. You mean the stuff I've heard about that is true? Human blood really is used in occult rituals? Some very rare black occult or satanic rituals, yeah. But the donor or donors offer up only a small amount of their blood, willingly as part of the ceremony by pricking a finger, usually, or a cut across the palm. It's pretty much a symbolic thing. Nobody gets bled to death. But somebody did this time? I mean, other than the guy we found in the woods. Riley frowned slightly as she gazed at the now closed folder on the table before her. Like I said, there was at least a quart in his stomach, all of it the same blood type, so likely from the same donor, though we can't be sure without DNA testing. But if it all did come from one person, that's a lot of blood to lose at one time. Too much? Leia asked. Could someone have lost that much blood and lived? Sure. 5 or 6 quarts in the human body, depending on size and weight. Losing a quart would be serious, but not necessarily fatal, especially if it was a ritual blooding and not some traumatic injury. Thing is, at least some more got splashed all over the scene. Jake nodded when Ash looked at him. We've got 2 blood types and all that, most from the Vic, but some apparently from the same donor who provided what was in his stomach. No real way to measure how much, especially since the ground soaked up a lot. I'm betting it was more than a couple of quarts all told. Then there's likely to be another murder victim we have yet to find. Maybe. Riley was still frowning. Or maybe not, because the anticoagulant was necessary, because it took a while to get enough blood without killing the donor or donors. You could probably take a little bit every day for several days without too much danger if you were careful, knew what you were doing. Ash said, so we're looking for somebody with anemia? Failing a second victim, or a first victim, rather. She looked at the sheriff. Any luck finding some kind of pattern in the blood spatter at the scene? So far, nada. Melissa says the software hasn't run its course yet, but her gut feeling is that there's nothing to find. It was a long shot, Riley shrugged. What would you have expected if there had been a pattern? Ash asked. Well, whoever this is seems to be big on signs, so I would have expected another sign or symbol. Here there be devil worshippers? Jake suggested dryly. Something like that. Subtle they aren't. They? Leia asked. Then she shook her head. Of course, it would be a group, wouldn't it? Probably. There are solitary practitioners in most religions, but for any major ritual, there would have to be more than one. Anything up to a dozen or so participants is most likely. Conspiracy in murder, Ash noted neutrally, is very rare. They wouldn't have viewed it as murder, Riley said. Still, for a group of people to keep this sort of secret, how likely is that? If they practice Satanism, very likely, or at least very possible. Ash, these groups can only survive if they keep their less conventional activities to themselves, and they learn that early. They're just too far out of the mainstream for community tolerance, much less acceptance. Leia was faintly surprised. Do they need community acceptance? If they live in the community, sure. Their religion is only a part of their lives. They shop, go out to eat, go to the movies and the theater, usually send their kids to school. It's not all that uncommon for some of them to hold public office, especially at the local level. So generally speaking, they keep quiet about occult practices. Ash was frowning. But you said whoever we're looking for in this case isn't being very subtle, deliberately? Maybe, or desperate. That was a very public place for a ritual, Riley said. Especially a major ritual involving sacrifice. Add that to the obvious arson sites, all the signs and symbols. It's either deliberately blatant or very careless. Either way, somebody is moving fast. Maybe too fast to avoid mistakes. Any idea what that major ritual would have been? Jake asked her. You said these things had a purpose, right? So what purpose was there in torturing a man and then beheading him? Riley shook her head to the repeated question and repeated her earlier answer. I don't know. Yet. He nodded as though expecting it. Well, while you're working on that, I've got some people checking out that group in the Pearson house. Because as far as I can tell, they're the only ones in the area who worship Satan. Openly, at least, Riley murmured. He ignored that. Soon as the background checks are done, probably in the next couple of hours, I mean to have a talk with that bunch. You game? I wouldn't miss it. Okay, Ash said as soon as they were left alone in the conference room. I did what you asked. Got myself included in the investigation. Want to tell me now why that matters? Riley felt a little shock and her mind raced. She didn't remember asking him to do any such thing. And since awakening to the missing 12 hours or so, had been too preoccupied to ask or even wonder why he had accompanied her to the sheriff's department. She didn't doubt he was telling the truth, but she also had no idea why she would have asked this of him unless... Riley, look, I'm not running away with some fatuous idea that you need me to hold your hand, but actually, she said slowly, I think maybe I do, in a manner of speaking. He waited. Brows lifting in a silent question. Riley hesitated only a moment. Jake said the background checks he's waiting for would take a couple of hours. There's something I want to check out myself in the meantime. I don't think I should do it alone. Let's go, he said. It wasn't until they were in his Hummer in the parking lot that he asked the obvious question. Where to? Riley drew a breath. The clearing where the body was found. He frowned. I know Jake kept the area roped off and guarded, but you've already seen whatever there was to see, haven't you? With my eyes, yeah. He didn't need that explained. But you said you weren't able to pick up anything clairvoyantly. I wasn't, but there were a lot of people around. It might be different now. Might? I need to try, Ash, because I lost more time, and maybe that changed things. Maybe. He looked at her steadily for a moment, then started the engine. Mine not to reason why. Long as you don't do and die, she murmured, or even ride into the mouth of hell. Ash smiled. Have I mentioned how much I appreciate having a well-read lover? I would have had to explain that reference to just about anyone else I know. Books and imagination see you through a lot as an army brat. Riley dug into her shoulder bag for a power bar. I have a mind filled with facts, poetry, and way too much useless trivia. It's only useless until you need it. She paused in unwrapping the bar to eye him. You kept that out of a fortune cookie. Probably. He glanced at her. I do have one question. Why me rather than your pal Gordon? He knows all about the clairvoyance, right? Yeah. So why not pick a former army buddy as backup if you're expecting trouble of some kind? Not that I'm complaining, you understand, just wondering. Riley was wondering about that herself. She had no way of knowing for certain that she had asked Ash to join the investigation for this reason. It was merely logical to assume, because she'd known from the beginning that she couldn't just accept the status quo, accept her MIA psychic abilities, that she'd have to push herself at some point, have to try with all her strength to tap into what that taser's electrical surge had damaged. She had no idea what would happen then, but logic also told her she shouldn't be alone when she tried. As for why she'd picked Ash over Gordon, logic provided a possible answer for that as well. Gordon's a civilian now, she said finally. He can't be officially involved in a murder investigation. You can. Ah, makes sense. Yes, it made sense. It was logical. She wasn't sure she believed it, however. The problem, of course, was that Riley had no memory of what had prompted her to request that Ash involve himself in the case officially. Maybe it was because of this, because she'd intended to try her damnedest to tap into her seemingly absent abilities, and wanted someone she trusted close by in case it knocked her on her ass. Maybe. Or maybe it was something else, something that had occurred to Riley as her mind raced when Ash told her about a decision made, apparently, in those missing hours. What if it happened again? What if she decided things, did things, made choices today that she wouldn't remember tomorrow? It had happened a second time now. Had she somehow guessed or known that her spotty memory and damaged senses had only been the beginning of her problems? What if her mind, her brain, had sustained even more damage from the attack on Sunday night than she had any way of estimating? What then? Again, logic demanded that if she intended to remain on the case under these circumstances, and she did, then she needed someone trustworthy who not only knew the truth but was also in a position to stick close and observe her virtually around the clock. At any other time, another SCU member would have been the automatic choice, but that simply wasn't possible now. Her lover, the DA of Hazard County, was the best choice she was left with. But to say that Riley felt either confident in or comfortable with that decision would have been to overstate the matter. For one thing, it was a very unofficial way to conduct herself during an investigation, and not at all in character for her. For another, and far more vital thing, can I trust him? I feel I can sometimes, most of the time, but not always. Doubts she couldn't even put into words nagged at her. It was like catching a glimpse of some movement from the corner of her eye, only to see nothing when she looked directly at it. She felt that way about Ash, that there was more going on than she could see, could know, and it made her wary. But can I trust my feelings, any of them? And even if I can trust him, will he understand? Can he? Chapter 13. She hadn't yet made up her mind to how to explain the situation to Ash, how much to tell him. Do I tell him how out of control I feel? Do I tell him I'm scared? Do I tell him I don't remember us? She didn't know. Riley. She realized she had tied the empty power bar wrapper into a knot twice and forced herself to stop. Yeah. You haven't told me a whole lot about the work you do, at least in specifics, but what you have said and what I know of you tells me that you've used your abilities most of your life. Yes? Since I was a kid, yeah. And we've already discussed the fact that both your Army and FBI training and experience have prepared you to face just about any eventuality. Riley didn't reply since it wasn't a question, and as he pulled the Hummer into a space near the dog park, she turned slightly in her seat to look at him. Ash turned the engine off, then met her gaze and nodded slightly. All that being the case, I have to ask what makes this situation different for you. I told you I'd never gotten involved with anyone during an investigation. Yeah, but I'm not talking about us, I'm talking about you. Ash, you're scared, and I want to know why. After a moment, she said, "Does it show so plainly?" He shook his head. As a matter of fact, if I didn't know you so well, I never would have seen any sign of it. There is nothing you said or did that gave you away, not really. You've just been a bit off the last few days, quieter, slower to react, to answer a question. And you've been tossing and turning a lot every night, so not quite yourself. And you read that as fear? Not at first. I'd venture to guess very little scares you. And I'm pretty sure you've seen things that would make my hair stand on end. So, fear wasn't the first possibility I thought of when I realized something was wrong. Riley waited. But then it dawned on me that despite what you were telling me, the way you've been burning energy so quickly during the last few days was unusual, even for a case. And that either you didn't know why it was happening or you were shaken because it wasn't something you could control. Control is a big issue for you. We both know that. It's a trait we share. Which is why you realized I was probably afraid. If there's something you can't control in your life, fear is possible. It's a natural response no matter what kind of training you've had. If there's something you can't control in yourself, fear is fairly inescapable, at least for people like us. Makes sense, she said, echoing his earlier comment, and it's a good read. Accurate? Riley nodded reluctantly. Accurate enough. I haven't encountered a situation like this one before. In what way? She hesitated again. Her mind still racing, still torn with uncertainty and wariness. Then finally took that leap of faith. She had to trust him. She had no choice. The burns on the back of my neck? His eyes narrowed. Yeah, not from a curling iron. Apparently I was immobilized by a stun gun sometime Sunday night. You were attacked? Apparently. Ash drew a breath and let it out slowly. That's twice you've used that word, apparently. You don't know? I don't remember. He got it quickly. The electrical charge had affected your mind? Riley nodded. My memory, my senses, all my senses, even the extra ones. I've been scrambling ever since to catch up, to remember, to figure things out. Christ, Riley. Do you remember what you were doing, who you were with? Not so much, and it's been a bit difficult to piece things together without admitting I don't have a clue what happened. And I'm hearing this only now. She kept her tone even. Imagine waking up with your memory full of holes. Imagine that when you woke up, you had dried blood on you, and then imagine that before you could get your feet under you and try to figure out what had happened, you were called to the scene of a grisly murder. Riley managed to shrug. It took me a while just to get all the characters straight, never mind the plot. I'm still working on that. Dried blood on you? That was the part of the report from Quantico that I didn't want to explain to Jake. First test, human. The blood on my clothes was human. My boss ordered to test it. Slowly, Ash said, and the second test said the blood was the same type as the donor. So the blood on you matched what was in the victim's stomach? Riley nodded. I don't have a clue how it got all over me, but the obvious possibility is that I was there. At some time, at some point before, during, or after that murder, I was there, involved somehow. You didn't kill anybody, he said immediately. I certainly hope not. But I can't explain that blood, and until I can, admitting all this to Jake doesn't seem like a good idea, especially since he's not all that happy with me right now. Ash frowned. Wait a minute. On Sunday night, you told me, unexpectedly, that you needed some time alone and sent me away, which means you knew something was going to happen. Or at least knew I wanted to do some investigating on my own. Yeah, we can assume that. But you don't remember where you were planning to go, or why? Afraid not. He turned his gaze forward, staring through the windshield as his long fingers drummed on the steering wheel for a moment. Then he looked at her again, this time with a certain amount of anger. This was never just a vacation for you, was it, Riley? So I hadn't confided in him about that. Why not? Damn it, why not? Riley, it's never just a vacation for me. Never. Mobile, Alabama, 2.5 years previously. By now, Riley could have been blindfolded and taken anywhere in the southeast or along the Gulf and would have been able to recognize a coastal or river city from the smell alone. She was also beginning to really dislike it. Musty, muddy, faintly sour. It made her think of damp and decay and blood. Not so surprising, really, considering how many butchered bodies she'd stood over in otherwise lovely coastal cities. This time, Riley didn't wait for the killer to strike. She didn't just drift into Mobile and blend in, vanish into anonymity while allowing her senses time to adjust, which had been the game plan up to that point. After New Orleans, waiting patiently was somewhat beyond Riley. Whether because this particular killer had thrown a gauntlet at her feet professionally, or because she felt personally violated, the fact remained that she was certain he had somehow managed to touch her mind more surely than she had touched his. And that to Riley was a hell of a strong motivation to get this case resolved and this killer behind bars ASAP. So despite Bishop's warnings, despite her own uneasy misgivings, she used every trick of concentration and focus she had learned in her life to begin trying to connect the moment she hit down. It wasn't the way her abilities were supposed to work, really. She had connected with other minds before. Bishop said her secondary or ancillary ability was telepathy, and being a telepath himself, he'd know. But generally speaking, telepathy was barely a blip on her personal radar, and her clairvoyance took the form of picking up bits of information from her surroundings or from other people. Touching objects or people tended to make it easier, but not always. Sometimes she got absolutely nothing, and on a few memorable occasions, she had been slammed by a dump of information that had left her mentally disoriented and physically exhausted. A truly disconcerting experience she was wary of repeating, but had no way of controlling or predicting. Cosmic irony, that. A not-so-gentle reminder from the universe that the gifts given never came without strings. In any case, her own gifts tended to be far more benign than those many psychics experienced. No pain, no disorientation, no visions yanking her from the here and now. Mostly, she just became aware of something rising in her mind, bobbing about to attract her notice, like flotsam on a wave. A fact, a feeling, a certainty. Reaching beyond that, opening herself deliberately to contact from a dark and twisted killer, was a move as risky as it was unprecedented, at least where she was concerned. She wasn't even sure how to do it other than to focus, concentrate, think about this butcher and how badly she wanted to stop him. Welcome to Mobile, little girl. Riley stopped in her tracks. She stood on a side street in downtown Mobile, near a well-lighted corner where people passed on foot and in cars on a typical weeknight like this. They went about their business oblivious as Riley put out a hand to the building beside her, steadying herself not so much physically as emotionally. There weren't words to describe how cold and slimy his thoughts were in her mind. Everything in her recoiled, yet she made herself stand still and silent, ignoring her surroundings until she saw nothing, felt nothing, heard nothing, except that voice in her mind, that presence. I knew you'd come, knew you'd follow me. Where are you? She whispered, not even aware that she'd shut her eyes, the better to concentrate. I'm close, little girl. Closer than I've ever been. Where? Can't you feel my breath on the back of your neck? She forced herself not to turn, not to betray the icy shiver, chilling her all the way to her bones on the warm, humid night. Where are you, you bastard? Fast as you were, I got here before you. I've been waiting, little girl. Damn you. I've left you a present. Riley's eyes flew open, and she jerked as though physically struck. No, she murmured, oh no. He had left her another victim to find, another butchered body, another family destroyed. She had failed again. Poor little girl, in such pain, but don't worry, you'll get another chance. We'll meet again, Riley. Present day. Riley? Dragging her mind back from the past, fighting to focus on the here and now, Riley had to wonder why, if she was sleeping with this man, she hadn't told him the real reason she'd come to Opal Island. Had she trusted him before the taser attack, or was there, among her lost memories, a reason why she'd allowed him to share her bed without sharing her truths? But she had already taken the leap of faith, so she pushed the doubts aside, drew a breath, and answered him honestly. Gordon got in touch just before I came down here. The fires, the signs and symbols pointing to the occult worried him. He's seen enough of the world, walked through enough jungles, to know when something bad is walking there too. He believed something was going on and that it was going to get worse. He asked me to check it out. Unofficially, of course. When he called, I'd just come off a case. I had vacation time piling up, and the unit wasn't busy, so my boss okayed it. Not a formal investigation, just a favor for a friend. Why didn't you tell me, Riley? We talked about the arson, the way people were getting edgy, even about the possibility of occult activities. You told me the occult was one of your specialties in the SCU. You never said it was why you'd come here. Because I didn't trust you enough, because I was afraid or knew that you were involved, or only because for the first time my personal life meant more to me than my professional one, and I didn't want them to get tangled? Why couldn't she think straight? Why couldn't she make up her damn mind about him? Riley, I don't know. I don't know why. I don't remember, Ash. Once again, his eyes narrowed. You don't remember? Do you mean it isn't just whatever happened on Sunday night that you can't recall? She nodded reluctantly. When I woke up on Monday, most of the last 3 weeks was pretty much a blank. Pretty much. A lawyer's determination to get things straight. Almost entirely, she admitted. There were flashes, faces, threads of memory that vanished like smoke when I tried to catch hold of them. I had to be told by Gordon and by my boss what I was doing here. Then you didn't remember us? No, Riley said, I didn't remember us. You sure as hell fooled me, Ash said. Riley looked at him for a moment, then unfastened her seatbelt and got out of the Hummer. She headed for the entrance to the dog park. Not surprised that the area was deserted, but for the board deputy standing guard at the break in the fence near the woods. Murders made people nervous, particularly gruesome murders with possible satanic elements made them downright panicky. Riley figured most dog owners were taking their pets to the beach for exercise these days. Riley. When he grabbed her arm and swung her around to face him, she almost reacted in self-defense. Almost. Those instincts, at least, were very much alive in her. And that training went so deep it was an ingrained part of her character. Her father had begun teaching her how to throw a larger opponent over her shoulder and disable said opponent before she started kindergarten. She was more than a little surprised she hadn't taken Ash's head off. Interesting, that. Important, she didn't know. She looked at the hand gripping her arm, not moving or speaking until he swore under his breath, and released her. Then she merely folded her arms and waited. Look, if anybody has a right to be pissed about this, I think it's me, he said, keeping his voice low, so that the deputy some yards away wouldn't hear. Oh, really? She stared up at him, matching his quiet steel with her own. Somebody attacked me? He or she put a stun gun to the back of my head and emptied electrical current into my brain. And not just the electrical current standard in a taser, meant to temporarily incapacitate. This was an amped-up weapon, Ash, a weapon quite probably intended to kill. It didn't kill me, but it put me down, and it damn sure screwed up more than my memory. So, forgive me if I chose to pretend nothing had happened for a few days while I tried to figure out who the hell I could trust. So far, Leah said to the sheriff, nothing unusual shown up in any of the background checks. He scowled. What, not even a parking ticket? I didn't say that. She handed a printout across the desk. 3 of them have bad credit ratings. Jake eyed her. Are you being funny? Obviously not. She perched on the arm of one of his visitors' chairs, smiling faintly. I'm just saying that not a single one of them has a criminal record of any kind. A few court appearances on civil matters, divorce, child custody, a property dispute, but absolutely nothing criminal. As far as we've been able to determine, the group in the Pearson house is clean. He grunted. Unless somebody gave us a false name. They had ID, she pointed out. And how hard is that to fake in this day and age? Hell, you can buy a new identity on the internet. Patient, she said, the paper trail looks genuine. Yeah. He frowned down at the report she'd given him. Keep digging. And when we hit bottom, dig a little deeper. Right. She stood up but paused before turning toward the door to say, if we don't find anything and they don't want to talk to us, we won't have a legal leg to stand on in questioning them about the murder. Not one thing we found so far ties any of them to the scene, and until we find out who the victim was. That's another thing I don't get, Jake said. We should have an ID by now. With the size of this county, we've had time to talk to nearly every soul. We've certainly had time to knock on every door. Almost, she said. Tim thinks by the end of the day our teams will have done that. Every door on the island at least, and most of those in Castle. The whole county will take a few more days. We need more people, he muttered. She hesitated, then said, well, in general, we don't need them. Don't remind me that I could call in the state police. I don't have to remind you, Leah shrugged. Anyway, they'd have to waste time getting up to speed before they'd be any real help. I'm betting Riley's going to make the difference here. I'm not so sure about that. Before she could respond, he added, she and Ash still in the conference room? No, they left a little while ago. To go where? Didn't say. His frown became a scowl. Find out, damn it. Leah didn't question or argue. She merely nodded and left his office to obey the order. She'd been one of Jake Ballard's deputies long enough to recognize the signs of a frayed temper, and though he seldom lost his entirely, when he did, it wasn't pretty. She returned to her own desk, nearly alone in the bullpen, with virtually every available deputy out doing the house-to-house. She tried Riley's cell first, not really surprised when she got only the voicemail. I don't know why she even bothers to carry a cell, she muttered to herself, as she hung up without leaving a message. Never seems to be working. A downside of being psychic, Riley had explained. Something about electromagnetic energy, as Leah understood it. It was sort of like Riley carried around with her a permanent static charge. Even her credit cards had to be carried in a special case, and the SCU-designed cell cases were only partially and sporadically protective because the phones had to be able to send and receive signals to be useful. Difficult, Leah supposed, to design a way in which to shield a device from electromagnetic energy when said device required energy to function. She was rummaging on her messy desk, looking for the business card Ash had given her earlier, with his cell number on it, when the deputy manning the front desk approached her. Hey, Leah, we might have something. She looked up at Tim Devaney, her brows lifting. Yeah, with the door-to-door? He nodded. We got a renter not answering his door, and neighbors haven't seen him at least since the weekend. Team's been back twice and still no answer. No sign of him. Leah frowned. A single renter? Was he on our first list? No. The realtor thought he was coming down with his family, and it's one of the big houses, so they had no idea he was alone. We have a name? she asked. Yeah, Tate. Wesley Tate. Chapter 14. After a long moment, Ash let out a short sigh. Okay, point taken. You have more right to be pissed. Thank you. They stared at each other, and then he finally smiled. So I'm the one you decided to trust, huh? Becoming more aware of the deputy watching them, Riley lowered her voice again. Well, I was sleeping with you after all. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I just don't make a habit of sleeping with men I barely know. So you said. She narrowed her eyes at him. Want to tell me why I made an exception for you? His smile widened. You know, I think I'll wait a while and see if that part of your memory comes back. Bastard. I said you had more right to be pissed. I didn't say I wasn't still pissed too. You're a hell of an actress, Riley. It might have dawned on me slowly that something was wrong, but I never guessed I was a stranger to you. She cleared her throat. Not a total stranger. My memory might have been AWOL, but other parts of me were... Let's just say some things came back to me quicker than others. Yeah, we were great in bed from the start, he said. I would have been seriously offended if you had forgotten that. I'll bet. It's a guy thing. Uh-huh. Well, while you beat on your chest, I'm gonna go see if I can pick up anything from the murder scene. Turning serious, he said, Riley, I don't have to know much about psychic abilities to guess this isn't a good idea. Probably not, but it's the only one I have right now. She shook her head. Look, Gordon couldn't tell me much because I hadn't told him much. I've never kept notes or an ongoing report during an investigation. Something I've just started doing here, in case my mind is more screwed up than I think it is. So it's not like I left a trail of breadcrumbs for myself to follow. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what I may or may not have learned in the last few weeks. All I know is that somebody attacked me and a man's dead. And your boss left you here without backup. Riley briefly explained just how occupied the remainder of the team was with their own cases, then added, Bishop wanted to recall me to Quantico, but I talked him out of it. I have to report to him every day, though, and when I report in today, I damn sure want a few answers to offer him. Otherwise, when he hears what happened yesterday... What happened yesterday? Shit. Reluctantly, she admitted, I lost a few more hours. What? You heard me. About 12 hours this time. From yesterday afternoon until this morning. Riley, you seemed perfectly fine last night. So I gather. It's fairly obvious that I was functional. Working at my laptop, starting that damn report. I just don't remember doing it. Jesus Christ. You want to explain to me why you aren't in a hospital? They wouldn't know what to do with me, Ash. About the only thing medical science knows about the human brain. Is that they don't know what most of it's used for. And as far as the SCU can determine, it's probably the part psychics do use. He was frowning. You're telling me medical tests wouldn't show any organic cause for the blackouts? I'm telling you they wouldn't provide any information I don't already have, and that it isn't something a doctor can slap a Band-Aid on and send me home with a prescription for. Riley, look, you're gonna have to trust me on this. Whatever damage that taser did, medical science can't fix. Maybe if I can tap into the clairvoyance, use my brain and senses the way I always have, then I can straighten myself out. Maybe. No guarantees. No. It could make things worse. That's as likely as any other outcome, she admitted. Is that why you finally decided to tell me the truth? Because you're afraid you could get worse, lose more time? Is that the sort of trouble you're expecting? I'm hoping there won't be any trouble, of course, but if there is, if I do lose more time, I'll need someone to keep me on track. Riley drew a breath and let it out slowly. I really don't know what could happen if I managed to tap into the clairvoyance. Maybe nothing. Maybe that sense is entirely gone. I certainly haven't been able to tap into it so far. Ash reached out and pulled her into his arms. Riley was a little surprised, but she found her arms going around his waist and was aware of a rather shaky sense of relief. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. We'll get through this, he told her, and no matter what you believe, you're a hell of a lot more than just a psychic. Preparing me in case it really is gone for good, she murmured. It's only a part of you, Riley, not all of you. If you say so. He kept an arm around her as they continued through the dog park to the break in the fence. It's your turn to trust me on this. Besides, I'm a lot more worried about these blackouts. You and me both, pal. The deputy stationed at the fence obviously knew both of them and only nodded and touched his hat with a polite murmur when they passed, but the faint smile he wore said plainly enough that he had observed the embrace with interest and without surprise. So I gather everybody knows about us, she said dryly. We weren't secretive. Why should we be? We're both unattached and past the age of consent. I just tend to keep my private life private, that's all. Another question in your mind? Let's just say it's another sign that something was different, that something changed after I got here, and it's very frustrating to not remember what that was. His arm tightened around her, but all Ash said was, I'm betting on you, if that's worth anything. I doubt very much you've ever lost a fight in your life. Not one that mattered, at any rate. Riley started to tell him he'd lose that bet, but by then they had reached the clearing still roped off with yellow crime scene tape, and she did her best to push everything else out of her mind. What now? Ash asked. Now, Riley replied, I'd try to do my job. Wait here if you don't mind. He didn't protest, just watched as she ducked under the tape and headed for the boulders at the center of the clearing. Anything I can do to help? Well, if my head starts to spin around and I spew pea soup all over the place, please drag my ass out of here. Please tell me you're kidding. She looked back over her shoulder to smile at him. Yeah, just keep an eye out, okay? If anything looks weird or wrong to you, break the connection. What connection? This one. Riley turned her gaze back to the boulders, drawing a deep breath and concentrating on opening every sense she possessed. Then she reached out and placed both hands firmly on the stone that might have helped make up an altar. She had unconsciously closed her eyes the moment her hands touched the rough stone. Though the bloodstains had faded to rusty marks that might have been mistaken for natural color variations in the rock, She was all too aware of what they really were, and it took all her willpower to deliberately open herself to them. She hadn't really expected anything to happen, not given the generally absent state of her senses. Almost immediately, however, Riley knew that something had. As if a switch had been thrown or a lid closed, she found herself abruptly surrounded by utter silence. No birds, no distant sounds of traffic and people. All she heard was her own suddenly shallow breathing. Riley forced herself to open her eyes and recoiled violently from the altar, stumbling back. The acrid smoke from the fire stung her nostrils, sulfur making the stench worse. Beyond the firelit clearing, the dark woods might have been miles deep, and ancient, impenetrable guardians for the ceremony taking place here. The robed figures dancing around the fire, some feet away, were familiar to Riley, but only in that she recognized the movements and gestures. The low chanting in a language most of the modern world had forgotten. She couldn't see any of their faces. None of them seemed to be aware of her presence. In any case, it wasn't the robed celebrants that had her fascinated gaze, but the open coffin placed upon the rock altar. Riley's first thought was that it must have been a bitch to carry the obviously specially designed coffin all the way out here. And even more of a problem to hide from observers while it was being transported, large as it was. But then she realized that, ornate and gilded though it first appeared, the coffin was actually made of some kind of sturdy cardboard. It fit fairly well on the flat rock they'd speculated might be used as an altar, and it was occupied. The woman wore a black hood, so it was impossible for Riley to see her face. She was otherwise naked, her arms folded across her breasts in the traditional death pose, but her knees were raised, her legs parted, in a clear if obscene invitation to a lover. Standing at the foot of the coffin on one of the smaller boulders was another robed celebrant, this one wearing a death's head mask rather than a hood. His arms were raised as he chanted a bit louder than the others, clearly leading them. His robe was open and he was naked beneath. He was also very aroused. Riley took another step back, and then another, thoughts and questions clashing in her mind. This was wrong, and not just in the sense that most people would undoubtedly be horrified by the scene. It was wrong because the ceremony was wrong. There were familiar bits, things she recognized. The chanting, the candles and incense. Even the coffin had a place in the satanic ceremony, but not like this. It was supposed to be, above all, a celebration of life, of the strength and power of the human animal, and sexuality was a very large part of that, but this was wrong. Before she could make it all come clear in her mind, she raised her gaze for the first time and was stunned to see a naked man hanging over the coffin. He appeared to be unconscious. Riley tried to get a good look at his face, but when 3 of the celebrants moved out of the circle around the fire and went to the altar, she couldn't help but watch what they were doing. In a weirdly graceful acrobatic movement, 2 helped the third one to climb to the top of the tallest boulder so that he stood parallel to the hanging man. There was a short sword in his hand, a kind of weapon Riley had never seen before. its sharp blade gleaming in the firelight. The other two celebrants went to the hanging man, and each reached up to grasp one of his ankles. Then they moved slowly back toward the far side of the altar, pulling his feet back and holding them high until his upper body hung over the coffin and the woman waiting inside it. Riley almost started forward instinctively when she realized what was going to happen, but that involuntary movement was halted when she reminded herself that this had already happened, or it was a vision, or even a figment of her taser-disordered mind and imagination. Bottom line, what she was seeing wasn't actually taking place before her. There was nothing she could do except watch in horror. The chanting became louder. The group around the fire danced more frenziedly. And then someone Riley couldn't see struck a bell sharply 3 times, and everything stopped. Only the snapping, popping fire offered any movement or life for what seemed an eternal moment. And then the man at the foot of the coffin spoke a phrase in Latin sharply. "Blood is the power?" That's what he said. The man on the topmost boulder leaned forward, grasped the hanging man's head by the hair, and drew it back far enough so that he was able to place the sharp blade against that unprotected throat. The man at the foot of the coffin spoke, again in Latin, a short phrase Riley tried to brand in her mind. "Blood is the life." Then, her voice muffled and unidentifiable, behind the hood covering her face, the woman in the coffin spoke. Her words were also in Latin, and her tone was eerily seductive. "I offer this sacrifice and draw from blood spilled, life spilled, the power of darkness, the power of evil, to do my bidding." The bell was struck 3 more times, and on the 3rd strike, the hanging man's throat was cut. Blood gushed out and down, splashing the coffin and the woman in it. She unfolded her arms, holding them out as though welcoming the blood or beckoning a lover. Her hips lifted and undulated, scarlet coated her breasts and stomach, and streamed down the insides of her thighs. The robed celebrants grouped around the fire began their dancing and chanting again, this time more frantically, their voices rising as the hanging man's lifeblood was drained from his limp body. The priest at the foot of the coffin chanted as well, his voice growing louder, more frenzied, until finally the woman convulsed and cried out in an orgasmic tone, and he cast off his robe and climbed into the coffin, mounting her writhing body. Riley's stomach heaved. She wanted to close her eyes or look away, but she was helpless to do either. She could only stand there and watch the obscene copulation taking place, while the chanting of the other celebrants became shouts, and the dying man's blood continued to spatter the 2 in the coffin, and the smell of incense and blood stung her eyes and her nostrils. This was wrong in so many ways. "Riley!" She opened her eyes with a gasp, momentarily dizzy, as she stared at the daylit clearing. No coffin, no robe celebrants, no victim hanging above the altar. She could still smell the blood. Riley, what in God's name? realizing only then that Ash's arms were around her, that he had undoubtedly pulled her away from the altar. She fought for the strength to get her feet under her and turned to face him. She was grateful when his hands continued to grip her arms. She thought she would have collapsed onto the ground otherwise. "What did I do?" she asked, the thick, rusty sound of her own voice unfamiliar to her. "You went white as a sheet," he said grimly, frowning down at her, and cried out something I couldn't quite catch. "By the time I got over here, you were shaking," and he lifted one hand and touched her cheek, showing the wetness on the tips of his fingers, crying. "Oh," she stared at the evidence of her tears. "I wonder why I did that. I was horrified, but..." "Horrified by what? Riley, what the hell happened?" She looked up at him, wishing she didn't feel so weak and drained, so utterly bewildered. "I saw what happened here. At least I think I did." "The murder?" "Yeah, except..." She fought to think clearly, except it wasn't right. He hadn't been tortured beforehand, and blood couldn't have splashed the flat altar stone because there was something lying across it, covering it almost completely. And there was too much noise. Someone would have heard, and it was wrong. What they said, what they did, wrong in too many ways. "Riley, are you telling me you had some kind of vision?" "I think so. I've never had one before, not like that. But some of the others on the team have talked about them, and I think that's what it was. But it was wrong, Ash. The details were wrong. The whole ceremony was like something you'd see in a horror movie." He seemed to understand what she meant. Over the top, exaggerated, in a way, as if someone who didn't really know what Satanism was imagined how it must be. Or knew, and wanted to twist it into something truly evil. "Maybe one of those fringe groups you mentioned earlier?" She shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe. It's nothing I've ever heard of, I know that much. An actual human sacrifice is about as evil as you can get. Add that to a weird ceremony that includes getting drenched in a dying man's blood while you screw in a coffin and screw in a... Jesus, Riley. Believe me, it looked as horrifying as it sounds. And from what I heard, I gather the purpose of the ritual was to draw power from the sacrifice and the sex. Power to do what? I have no idea. But there has to be some reason behind it, some need for supernatural power. Same as with the arson, attempts to harness elemental energy. Yeah, and a hell of a lot of it. I can't imagine why someone would need so much power, but... She felt herself slump a little and thought her energy reserves must be really low. "Riley, I'm fine, Ash. I'll be..." Riley sat up in bed with a gasp, her heart racing. She almost immediately recognized her bedroom, quiet and lit only by moonlight filtering through the blinds on the windows. A quick look showed her Ash sleeping peacefully beside her. The clock on the nightstand said it was 5:30 in the morning. Oh, Christ. She slipped from the bed, finding her sleep shirt on the floor, and putting it on with an icy sense of deja vu. It couldn't be happening again, not again. She went into the living room and found the remote to turn on the TV. Her hand shaking so much that just pressing the right small buttons on the device was a challenge. CNN confirmed her fears. It was Thursday. She'd lost more than 18 hours this time.